Just 4 days after the American Civil War began, former President Franklin Pierce proposed a meeting of all of the living former presidents. It was to be held in Philadelphia, where the Constitutional Convention had been held nearly 74 years prior. The other living former presidents were Martin Van Buren, John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, and James Buchanan. Now, more than at any prior point, the nation's former presidents were getting involved in politics. Van Buren worked on efforts to save the Union, such as the Crittenden Compromise, and John Tyler, who left office in 1845, even visited the White House during the final months of James Buchanan's presidency to talk peace and reconciliation. Pierce had such anxiety over the state of the nation that he developed a 2-month-long throat and lung infection early in 1861, and even then he stayed involved in national matters through writing. Pierce believed the former presidents held enough national sway to affect the opinions of the public and the current administration. He hoped they could arrest the conflict before it escalated. He sent his proposal to Martin Van Buren. Quote, "The present unparalleled crisis in the affairs of our country is, I have no doubt, filling you, as it is me, with the profoundest sorrow. Is there any human power which can arrest the conflict of arms now apparently near at hand between the two sections of the Union? There is no time for effective assemblages of the people, no time for convention or protracted discussion. If the 5 retired presidents of the United States, still living, were to meet at the earliest practicable date at the city where the Constitution was formed, might not their consultation, if it would result in the concurrence of judgment, reach the administration and the country with some degree of power?" Since Van Buren was the earliest serving ex-president, Pierce asked if he would contact the 3 others and lead the meeting. Van Buren declined. He said it only made sense that Buchanan lead it, being that he was the most recent president and well acquainted with the current issues. He encouraged Pierce to contact Buchanan. He also expressed doubts that the meeting would have any practical effect, but did agree to attend if the others agreed. However, it's also possible Van Buren had no interest in attending, no matter the circumstances. He was notoriously indirect, a trait friends called politeness and enemies called slyness. So it's no surprise he wouldn't have outright denied the request even if that was his intent. On the surface, Van Buren and Pierce seemed politically aligned. Both were Democrats and had supported each other in past elections. Both supported Buchanan in 1856, and both had Southern sympathies and had previously stated that if no peaceful solution to the secession crisis could be found, the South should be allowed to leave. However, over the years, Van Buren had become increasingly frustrated with the South and more openly opposed to slavery. While he opposed the election of Abraham Lincoln, he did eventually support him for the sake of the Union. One example of this is a lengthy letter he wrote to Lincoln's Postmaster General, Montgomery Blair, in which he delivered a scathing attack on Buchanan's policies of Southern appeasement. After the firing on Fort Sumter, Van Buren gave his full support to the Union war effort. For the most part, Pierce never relented his support for the South, always seeing them as the aggrieved party. When urged to talk the South out of secession, he replied, quote, "How can I urge the men of the South to take a view I should not take if I were there?" When it came to Buchanan, Pierce believed he hadn't gone far enough with Southern appeasement. He not only opposed Lincoln's election, but never supported the new president. Lincoln's response to Fort Sumter only deepened his disdain. In his book, The President's War, author Chris DeRose speculates that Van Buren felt a meeting of the former presidents would only serve to undermine Lincoln. DeRose also speculates that Pierce felt this too, but that for Pierce, it was the goal. It's also possible that by putting the initiative to lead the meeting in Buchanan's hands, Van Buren was silently killing the idea. Van Buren, and just about everyone else with any political knowledge, knew that by the final months of his presidency, Buchanan was overwhelmed, angry, confused, and ready to leave the nation's conflicts to the next president. As Chris DeRose also notes, had Buchanan agreed to the meeting, Van Buren had still created an out for himself, as his agreement to attend was on the condition, quote, "if it be in my power to do so." This could have simply been because of his advanced age. He was 78 with declining health. Perhaps a trip to Philadelphia was simply too much. However, his physical condition hadn't prevented him from trying to bolster Lincoln's war effort in any way he could, such as joining a Union committee in his hometown and writing letters to stay involved in matters outside his state. Perhaps most telling of Van Buren's motives was his reaction when meeting Pierce face to face. 2 weeks after penning his letter, Pierce traveled to Van Buren's home. Van Buren was as friendly as ever, but now flatly declined the meeting, though he said he'd only come to this conclusion upon subsequent reflection. Much to Pierce's frustration, Van Buren was now fully behind the new president. The meeting of the former presidents wasn't going to happen. There's no indication Pierce ever contacted Buchanan, Fillmore, or Tyler. But even if Van Buren had moved the meeting along, it's doubtful it would have occurred. In the time between Pierce sending his letter and Van Buren receiving it, John Tyler, along with his state, Virginia, had already joined the Confederacy. Millard Fillmore had given a passionate speech in support of the war effort and donated a large sum of his personal money to it. Unrelated to Pierce's proposal, someone else asked Fillmore about a meeting of the former presidents, and he dismissed it, saying it would undermine Lincoln's authority. And outside of making occasional statements, Buchanan wanted nothing more to do with politics. It is possible the two would have agreed to a meeting out of deference for Van Buren, but that remains unknown. For Pierce, however, this was hardly the end. The war was just beginning, as were his attempts to subvert it. He'd spend the next 4 years using any power he had to bring an end to what he called a cruel, heartless, aimless, and unnecessary war. For this video's sources, check the description below. Also in the description is a link to Patreon. Donations of $2, $5, or $15 a month go a long way to supporting this channel.